Here's my Baylor football prediction video. Baylor returns 7 starters on offense. Granted, I know Gary Bohannon's gone, but I think they got to upgrade at quarterback in terms of the passing game and Blake Shapen. Yes, they have question mark at wide receiver. Running back is not so much because of the O-line, but still it's a young group. But I'm not as concerned about that as wide receiver, which they still might need to address in the transfer portal. And granted, I don't know for all these teams, especially Baylor, if they're going to get somebody in a transfer portal or not from now until the season starts. But they returned 6 stars on defense, which they did lose to Terrell Bernard, but I think they got a really good linebacking core with Josh White coming in next year and bringing back Dylan Doyle, as well as Garmin Randolph, Matt Jones. They do have a little bit of question mark at the secondary, but it's not like they trust those guys. It's just the inexperience. Some of the inexperience, but at least they bring back a few guys like Al Rockcott, Christian Morgan. And they do return their starting kicker and punter from last year, 31.6 points per game last year, while allowing 18.3, 219.3 rushing yards per game last year, 203.4 passing yards per game, while allowing 118.4 rushing yards per game, 227 passing yards. Okay, the first game is Albany on September 9th in Waco. They do bring back their most used quarterback from last year and one of the best wide receivers, Jackson Parker, with 32 receptions for 461 yards with 1 touchdown, as well as Mike Gray, 17 receptions for 234 yards. Their starting punter's back, but the best 2 defensive backs, the best 4 defensive linemen are back. They on average, Albany averaged 18.9 points per game while allowing 26.2. 90.5 rushing yards per game and 212.6 passing yards per game, but they allowed 184.5 rushing yards per game, 162.9 passing yards per game, and that's at the FCS level, by the way. Granted, they were 2-7 last year, but they had a few close one possession losses, so they're better than their record showed. But I think Baylor should win this game convincingly. That's what I just want to know. Now BYU on the road the following week. That's an interesting matchup for me because we know that's a future Big 12. And last year Baylor beat them by 14. BYU scored late. That's why it got that close. But, they returned 8 starters on offense. But they didn't bring back Tyler Algier, but he was a non-factor last year. But they bring back Jaron Hall for sure, as well as some the best one, the most of the receiving core. They do return 11 stars on defense, as well as their starting punter and kicker. They average 33.1 points per game, and while allowing 24.7, 188.2 rushing yards per game, and 264.1 passing yards per game. But they did allow 156.8 rushing yards per game and 231.9 passing yards per game. Blake Shapen, this is his first true road test here. But I think somehow Baylor escapes in this game by a touchdown or less, or definitely less than 2 touchdowns or less. But I will say, this is not an easy game by any means. Tough place to play. They return a lot. This is the first true road game for the team in this year as well. And they're good enough to be like a 10-2 football team this year, or 11-1. Okay, next game is Texas State, and we know Texas State is not that great. But they have 10 stars back on offense, 11 stars back on defense, as well as a starting kicker and punter. But does that really matter for Texas State? I don't think so. Baylor will win this game comfortably, just to get more reps. 23.1 points per game last year for them, and while allowing 33, 149.2 rushing yards per game, while allowing 184.4, 193.1 passing yards per game, while allowing 246.8. I really do think this Baylor offense is going to take advantage of this defense and any bad pass defense from last year. And yes, they're going to improve some, but I think they'll be more explosive with the more down the field game. I mean, like the downfield more with the more consistent, accurate arm. No offense to Gary Bohannon, but that's the truth. Okay, Iowa State on September 23rd. It's on the road. It's not an easy place to play, first of all. But they lost 5 starters on offense and 4 starters on defense. As well as they did bring the starting kicker from last year. He's gone too. So, but they bring back their starting punter. That was a team last year that severely underachieved despite having the best team in program history. Yeah, I put that in quotes because they had a lot of returning production from the year before and they failed to live up to expectations. They really did. They went 7-6 last year with probably what should have been a better team than 7-6. They did score 32.8 points per game last year while allowing 20.6, 168.6 rushing yards per game, and 268.8 passing yards per game, while allowing 122.3 rushing yards per game and 187.8. So it was really the offense that was the issue last year in some instances. But they did lose Breece Hall. They lost Brock Purdy, their starting quarterback from last year. Baylor should win this game by 2 touchdowns or less. Okay, next game is is September 30th, and it's the first big road home game for Baylor football in the year. It's against Oklahoma State, and we know Oklahoma State. Baylor had to beat them in the Big 12 title game after losing to them by 10, but it would have been like 3 points because that late touchdown in the end was it was 17-14. Oklahoma State scored a late touchdown. They bring back 7 starters on offense, but they only bring back 4 starters on defense, and as well as their starting kicker and punter. That's a lot of production lost. They did also lose their defensive coordinator as well, Jim Knowles, but they got the former Vanderbilt coach, Derek Mason. They did bring him in, but last year they scored 31.5 points per game. Not great. I mean, that's okay. But with Spencer Sanders at quarterback while allowing 18.1, I think that number is going to go up this year in terms of points per game allowed because so many stars are gone from last year. But they did bring back a lot of most of their production back is defensive line. But they 185.5 rushing yards per game and 231.9 passing yards per game last year while allowing 87.6 and 210.2 passing yards per game. I will say this is a tricky game here at home, but Spencer Sanders, Baylor's his kryptonite. 7 interceptions last year in those 2 games. And historically, he's not been great against Baylor, except 2020. Granted, that was a COVID year, and Baylor was already beat up at the time with COVID, with injuries and COVID issues. So, and 2019, he had a few turnovers as well. So, I think Baylor should win this game here. Next game is West Virginia on October 12th on the road on a Thursday night. This is a interesting game, like 6 to 8 stars back on offense, but they did bring in JT Daniels, but I'm not going to say JT Daniels fixes every issue for West Virginia, but they bring back 5 to 8 stars on defense as well as their starting kicker. 25.2 points per game last year. That's not good. Well, 23.8. So it's really the offense that held them back last year. 123.6 rushing yards per game last year, and they lost Luddy Brown. They did. And 247.9 passing yards per game, but they allowed 138.5 rushing yards per game and 211.5 passing yards per game last year. Baylor beat them by 25 last year. I don't see a 25-point swing. I'm sorry, West Virginia fans, but look, you can't make up that many points in 1 year. And Baylor brings back And yes, I know West Virginia O-line got better after that Baylor game. Granted, I know that. But this D-line, you don't want to mess with. It's the best one in the Big 12, or even up there with Oklahoma State. Those two are the best in the Big 12 this year. Next game is Kansas on October 21st at home. 8 stars returned back for them, 7 on offense, 7 on defense, starting kicker and punter. Doesn't really matter about Kansas. I think they're improving, but I don't think Baylor's going to lose to them at home. So that's a win. Texas Tech on the road, that's a trap game to me because it's the game before Oklahoma. They've returned 4 stars back on offense, 5 stars back on defense, as well as their starting punter. And they have a new head coach in Joe McGuire, and Baylor knows him, obviously. But I think they're borderline bowl game team to me, without going through the stats for this, because it's a new head coach. I'm thinking Baylor wins this game, but it's going to be 10 points or less here. Now, the following game is November 4th against Oklahoma on the road. I don't know what to make of Oklahoma this year. Their skill guys are brand new. Both on offense, and they only bring back 5 stars on defense, as well as their starting punter from last year. So, I don't know what to think. They're doing with the new system on offense and defense. And yes, I know Jeff Levy's offense is going to be good, but I don't know how good under year 1. And they think Daniel Gabriel is better than Caleb Williams, same or better than Caleb Williams. I don't think he is. I think he's a step below. And I think because Baylor wants to get to the college football playoff, they'll beat Oklahoma. And I don't know what to make of Oklahoma. I could very well see this as a loss here, but I think Baylor should get the job done. Obviously, next game is November 11th against Kansas State. 5 stars return on offense, 5 stars return on defense, as well as a starting punter and kicker. And that's a grinded out game coming up right there. 27.5 points per game while allowing 21. 162.4 rushing yards per game. 199.9 passing yards per game last year while allowing 129.7 rushing yards per game and 215.2 passing yards per game. If Baylor could beat Kansas State with only having Blake Shapen play only a half, I think they'll get them again this year, and it's at home. So that should be a win. Next game is TCU on November 18th. To me, you got to win this game this time. Because without that loss last year, Baylor would have been in a college football playoff potentially over Cincinnati. Let's be honest. They would have been. They only lost by 2 last year. They returned a lot, but they have 10 stars on offense and 8 stars back on defense, as well as starting kicker and punter. But the thing is, I don't know what to make of them. I think they're more like borderline, no better than 8 wins, but 5 to 8 win team. And because this is at home and it's senior day, Baylor should win this game. Now, Texas, November 25th, the last game of the year, and it's on the road. It's not ideal to play a rival on the road. It's not ideal. And this might be your last chance against Texas in football. Because I don't know whether or not they're going to leave for the SEC after this year, or they're going to stick around for 2 more years, another year or 2. They returned 6 stars on offense and 6 stars on defense, but they lost their starting punter / kicker from last year. Let's be clear. The offense is not the issue in terms of points per game, 35.3 for them last year, but they allowed 31.1. Their defense is trash. They allowed 201.6 rushing yards per game and 224 passing yards per game last year. And that was a team with a bunch of 5 stars, 4 or 5 stars. So, as you can tell, and they have Bijan Robinson, they bring in some other transfers as well. But the problem is, their O-line, if you look at the spring game, Texas's O-line got exposed against their own guys. They're going to start. They're bringing in a lot of freshmen, but how many of those are going to start? And that's an experienced offensive line. And they're going to go against a veteran and better defensive line than Texas has at the defensive line here. So I'm predicting this as a win right now. But I know they got Quinn Ewers, but let's not overhype the guy already because we don't know he's not played a single college football snap. And I know they did bring in an Alabama transfer at tight end. Yes, I realize that as well as Isaiah Neyor. And they still have Xavier Worthy. And they got Bijan Robinson. But I think somehow Baylor slows the game, shuts them down just enough to win this game. Yes, I'm saying 12-0. But that's best case scenario. 12-0 or 11-1 best case. To me, if I'm being fair with this schedule, anything worse than 9-3, given what you bring it back, and especially at the offensive line and defensive line, you should not go any worse than 9-3. And yes, I know it's a tricky road slate. I know it is. Because you got BYU, you got Texas, you got Oklahoma, you got West Virginia. Those are the tricky road games. Not to say Texas Tech isn't or Iowa State isn't, because they're somewhat tricky as well, but those are the biggest games. To me, those Big 12 road games I listed in terms like Texas, Oklahoma, West Virginia, those are the three trickiest road games, in my opinion, against quality teams this year. No offense to Iowa State, I just don't know about Iowa State this year. Anyways, if you like this content, hit the like and subscribe button. I'll see you guys later. It's going to be up to 400 subscribers or more by the end of this year.